Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, where we uncover the pivotal stories that shape extraordinary leaders. I'm Dusty Holcomb, and on this show, we don't just talk about leadership, we decode it. In every episode, we sit down with change makers who've walked through the fire, challenged the status quo, and emerged with wisdom worth sharing. These aren't just lessons, they're lived experiences, real moments that reveal the mindset, resilience, and clarity behind lasting impact. Today, you'll hear one of those stories. What if you could measure company culture like you measure profits? Eddie Geller says you can, and he's built the tech to prove it. From bootstrap founder to public company CEO, Eddie's led 3 companies, raised 4 boys, and somehow still finds time for Spartan races and espresso. Maybe he runs on espresso. But now he's on a mission to help leaders turn culture into their greatest competitive advantage. If you've ever wondered how to build a business that scales and sustains people, this one's for you. Let's get into it. This is Leadership Unlocked. Eddie, first off, man, thank you so much for taking the time. This is your 3rd company you founded and started and are running. And I know how incredibly busy and how hard it is to carve time out. So thank you for doing that. I have to tell you, I've been like just on pins and needles looking forward to this conversation. You and I have talked several times, and I am so just enthralled with what you do and why you do it. And we're going to get into all of that. But I would like to start with just a simple question of, tell me a leadership principle or a belief that you live by, and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, well, firstly, thanks so much for inviting me on the show, Dusty. I'm a huge fan of yours and just what you're doing with clients out there. And kudos to you for having the courage to go out and build something from scratch. I know how tough that is. So really cheering from the sidelines, anything I can do to help, I'm definitely up for. So appreciate the opportunity to come chat to you today. That's for sure. In terms of leadership principle, there's so many. I would say one that sticks to me probably the most, but obviously context is everything, is to endeavor to finish as a leader all your questions, all your statements with a question mark rather than a period. Because too often leaders and more so managers who don't know how to lead think that they need to have all the answers and think they need to have all the statements and think they need to tell people what to do and how to do it. But, as I've learned the hard way and really leaned into this specifically and coach and develop people through this lens is like, if managers and leaders could just do one thing really well, you would be asking more questions, more curiosity. And if they could just, as I said, finish their segments with a question mark rather than a period, then their teams would actually be more successful and they would actually be more effective and then happier.
Oh, well, we're starting off with just like a solid golden nugget for our audience right there, and I could not agree with you more. I once heard Jim Collins talk about a conversation he had with Peter Drucker, and, Peter Drucker told him, hey, you need to work on your questions to statements ratio. Like you need to focus on more questions and less statements, less about you, more about the other party. Yes. And that's what you just said. Well, how did you learn that question? Was that something you were born, or that philosophy, was that something you were born with, or did you have to learn it the hard way?
I think it evolved because frankly, I didn't, I'm one of those college dropouts, Dusty. I was not academically bright. I still don't consider myself very bright, but I've learned sort of street smarts. So lots of street smarts, right? And I think I bloomed later in life. I was terrible at school academically. I was a pretty respectable student. Academically, I was not very bright. I later bloomed, I think, through my 20s, really because I did things with my hands and tried lots of things. But because of that nature, I always thought that I was never the smartest person in the room. And the only way really that I could have impact was to ask questions and just to have opinions, but not to dictate. So I've sort of, because I've always been in environments in which I can have an opinion, but often I'm not the smartest guy in the room. The only way to actually contribute is to lean in with questions. So I think that probably evolved through my 20s and 30s. And then the chairman of my last company, he gave me this poignant statement, which I shared with you just now. It's like, well, he said, and he was chairman of companies and CEOs of lots of globally publicly traded companies. He said to me, he would be more effective to me as a CEO if he would finish his statements with a question mark. And he said to me that if I ever found he didn't have enough of them, he invited me to push back on him. So that was, again, a nice lesson for me. But I think I've taken, probably just hearing it the way he described it has taken me forward. And I share that a lot with any manager I speak to. But I think it was kind of always there because I never had all the answers. And I never thought that I did. And I think because of that, I was probably conditioned a certain way to be comfortable with not having those answers and leaning into more questions, frankly, I think.
Hearing you talk about him, I love the fact that he's not only saying, here's some good advice, here's a way to lead more effectively, but also inviting you into calling him out if he doesn't do it. Like that's totally powerful as a leader when you're making it not a do as I say, but you're asking for that feedback. Mm-hmm. That's cool. You're in the States now, but obviously your accent isn't from the US. You've got a really cool, fun accent. Tell me a little bit about what brought you here, your life growing up, and how you ended up here in the States.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the weird accent, I'm Australian, although most Americans I meet think that I'm British or South African. So, probably the 1 in 10 decipher the Aussie accent in me. So originally from Sydney, from Bondi Beach, for those of your listeners that know where that is. I was born and raised. My parents were my parents came from the Ukraine, so I'm first generation Australian. Actually, all my friends were first generation because our parents immigrated after World War II from Europe to Australia. So, born with basically, very humble, environments. My parents had nothing, when they came and not even the language to utilize, and had to work 3 jobs. And I always, learned that we had to work and contribute to family, and family was everything. And what's interesting is that I never thought that I was missing out on much. Our parents, always thought we had a lot. I never felt like we had anything we're missing out on, although we didn't do much. We'd have we'd never go out to restaurants. We'd do the once a year, vacation, driving up there, staying in a motel, eating in every night. But I never thought we were missing out. That was the wonderful thing I think my parents did really well. And actually, they were both entrepreneurs. My mother was a successful owner of a deli she had with her sister. They did reasonably well. They sold that. So I was selling. I was behind the counter at the age of 8, selling stuff and figuring out the cash register on weekends. And that was super fun. And then my dad was a contractor. He was a carpenter. And could build anything with his hands, and was complaining to my mum for years about he wants his own business. And then they finally bought a new business I think I was 12, 13 years old, and the business didn't do particularly well through the 91 recession. My parents ended up losing the business and losing the house and had to go rent. So I learned really the school of hard knocks in that failure of my dad. And what's interesting is that he was an incredible craftsman. He could build anything, but figuring out how to make $1 on it was actually his biggest weakness. He was always about the perfect kitchen, the perfect wardrobe, the perfect desk at all costs. And I think, unfortunately, that was his downfall. So I learned a lot through my parents', entrepreneurship journey. And maybe that was sort of the DNA in me, to always wanting to be in the sort of my own businesses rather than working for other people, because they felt that they couldn't really build a successful lifestyle that afforded the lifestyle they wanted by working for someone else. They could only do it by having to have their own business. So I think that was the setup for me to become an entrepreneur. Although if you ask me in my 20s, what do you want to be when you grow up? The word entrepreneur wouldn't have been there. It was I just need to survive. I just need to learn and work somewhere. My first company actually I started in 1996, Dusty. It was called, wait for it, Eddie's Internet Solutions. I sucked at marketing, but I thought, hey, this will tell everyone what I do. And I used to set up internet for people at home, computers for people at home, because that was when the internet was starting to really take off in the mid 90s. And I got into it very early on. And I remember having leaflets and flyers and standing at the train station handing them out. 96, 97, and like the headline would be getting on the information superhighway in less than $20 a month. Like my marketing was like abysmal, but hey, he got me started. And that was actually my first business, was Eddie Internet Solutions. And then, one led to to sort of, I guess, the next proper business, which is the Unique World business, which I'll pause there. But yeah, I definitely learned through that upbringing of like the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and the pitfalls accordingly.
Well, I'm fascinated by that. And I think Eddie's Internet Solutions actually has a nice ring to it. There's a couple of things that really jump out to me. And, the entrepreneurs, like I think a lot of times people, they glorify or they put entrepreneurs on a pedestal and like, because they only see the super success and they go, oh, that person's just so successful. And they don't see the school of hard knocks and the 16 times you got knocked down and then you get up to 17th. And it's the way you talk about it with your dad that's really poignant because your dad wasn't, I would say, just hearing you describe him and watching your body language, he was an artist. He was a craftsman.
Yeah.
And, owning his own business was a vehicle for him to be a craftsman. That didn't mean he was a good businessman. Was there a particular lesson you learned from watching that through your lens and watching your parents go through this, and specifically your dad, not fail, but just not be successful as the entrepreneur, even though he was a master craftsman?
Yeah, that's kind of great lessons I learned from him. He was always focused on the product and not the customer. So that was a critical fail. And and when I say product, like he wanted the money to then buy the next machine to have a better product, or the next, feature of like the way the drawers are working in a kitchen for the best product. It was always about the product, at sadly the expense of the customer and the business, because he would do a beautiful job and the customer was like, there are a few things you're missing here. And he just wouldn't finish the job and he wouldn't get the last 5 to 10%. And I worked with him. I'd be working there on weekends. I worked there, on school holidays. So I'm pretty handy around the house because of him. Then going into the commercial nature, he really left the commercial now. It's like he signed this lease for this new factory. He got into an 87 or maybe 88 on this auto increase rent regardless for 5 years. It just crushed him because when business turned in 1990 and 91, didn't have the revenue, and they crushed him. And I think he had like $250,000 in debt. And that's how my parents lost the house. And seeing them having to rebuild and go rent when, I'm 19 at this stage, and they're clearly in their late 40s, early 50s, that's tough. Like you work your heart and soul into something and then seeing them having to reset their lives. And I know it happens to many people, so they're not alone, but just watching them through that lens was definitely a learning experience. And again, I think, as you know, like everyone knows this for the fact, but you learn so much more from the failures than from the successes. And I kind of wish my mum and my dad were going to business together, but maybe they wouldn't have survived marriage if they did, right? So who knows, right? Because some people can either work together, like my wife and I, for example, could never work together. That's a funny story separately I can share with you that lasted 90 minutes. We were together at work and then we knew we were never going to be in work again. But some people live and breathe work together and life together. So it's really one of those things where my mum was great at selling commercials, my dad was great at the craftsmanship, but they never were in business together. But yeah, I learned so much more from his failures, and I know that's probably obvious for everyone.
Well, it's not always obvious when you're in the middle of it, right? You can only learn some of these things in the rearview mirror. And that's really, frankly, we want to do with some of these conversations is what are the tools and lessons that people learn through their defining moments. Yeah. And I do want to hear the story about you and your wife and 90 minutes of figuring that out, but I'll come back to that. You said something a minute ago I really like, in your dad was focused on the product and not the customer.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, knowing what you do today and what you've done in the other companies you've built, what is your mindset around the customer versus the product and how you approach that, where value is being created and where it's not? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Dusty. I think it's so fascinating. It's like, and there's no right or wrong, as you know. I
Hmm.
think that my first company, Unique Worlds, were a web developer come technology consulting company. We did a lot of custom services, software development, or just traditional consulting for large organizations. We're a customer, all about the customer, right? Because the customer requirements dictate our services. We're all about servicing them. So the product was our people, right?
Mm.
And clearly selling that to customers that we related to and we felt that we could obviously offer value to. From the second business, Tiny Beans was all product. And I think it was too much product. I think we're too focused on the product to the point where I think 80% of the features we built were never used by customers because it's over engineered. And it's a classic, the whole Henry Ford model. You ask the customer, if you ask the customer at the time what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse than a car. Like we get the whole aspect of you need to sort of futurize what the customer needs, not necessarily ask what the customer needs. I get that balance, but I think that was too focused on product in the last company. The current company, SKOR, it's a very intense tension between them. Lot. I'm almost like I'm far more customer, and I say pitch over product.
Mm.
Pitch, and then and have the product like being right there constantly. So I think I'm much more customer market aware because of the stars of my prior companies. Then it's all about the product. I don't think it can't be about the product without the customer. And I think the customer has to be very tightly connected to product. In my business, I know every business is different, but it's such a great question and conundrum. And I think you need that really healthy tension between the two. You can't lose sight of either, frankly. Otherwise, you'll die.
I love the way you use the word tension there because that's exactly what it is. It's a tension. It's like when folks ask me about work-life balance, and I always say, well, it's not balance; it's balancing, and you're navigating tension and navigating trade-offs all the time, and it's just part of what you have to do. What is your secret sauce to managing that tension and living in the shoes of the customer and viewing the world through their lens, and then from the product creation lens, what it is you're trying to do to build for the customer? What's your approach to that?
It's all about the customer to validate your thesis of product you built.
Mm.
And so for me, it's this constant, flywheel between the two around the customer feedback, iterate the product, customer feedback, iterate the product. Like let's release the product. So for example, we just finished up an assessment a few weeks ago for one of the clients and they provided us feedback. We had a session with them and super powerful. Like the feedback is like bullseye, right?
Mm.
And we've heard the feedback from the people. Great. It's added to the roadmap. We'll get it in the next release. We'll have it ready for customers. I love that iterative approach. And I think now more than ever before, you can move so much faster, as you know, with AI and the tooling. Like in my last company, it would take months to get things into the backlog, into a roadmap, and to be built.
Mm-hmm.
But you can move so much faster now than ever before. And I think that's an advantage. That's for sure. So I think, again, in the lens of today, with the tooling today, we can move much faster. But I think it's this constant evolution between product and customers. And we're still very much, transparently, like, although we've got customers paying and we've got partners growing, we're still in early product market fit. Like, I'm not kidding myself like, oh, with customers, that means I've nailed it all. Not at all. I'm constantly evolving product market fit because I don't even know, when it's going to be there, but we'll figure it out. So I need to just be constantly staying curious and learning. That's the only way it's going to get us through. And if we start to get acceleration, then maybe we're getting closer and closer. Someone told me, one of the head of product for my last company said to me, Eddie, it feels like we're hitting hitting the target, just not the bullseye. So I think at the
Mm.
moment I'm hitting a target, just not the bullseye yet. And that's what constantly gets me sort of this fuel to get more and more questions, like what's working, what's not, how is it working for you? Because they're all the things, but like you have to constantly be asking the questions and stay humble and curious as opposed to the problem with too many product companies that they lead into confidence and arrogance and complacency. And we will never do that.
I love that analogy of hitting the target and not the bullseye, because then you're adjusting for wind and distance and
Yeah.
all these other
Hmm.
variables. You have to pay
Yes.
attention.
Yes.
And man, the minute you're not, you're dead. Like you're no longer adjusting. It's if you hit
Hmm.
the bullseye at that point, you're lucky. You're not good. You're not intentional.
Totally. 100%.
I want to understand like, I'm fascinated with what you're doing at SKOR, and
Hmm.
because it aligns, as I've said earlier, just so beautifully with some of my philosophical beliefs about the importance of people and culture. How did you get to SKOR? Maybe first off, just tell the story of what SKOR does,
Hmm.
and tell to me. I'd love to know like the founding story. What led you to this, creating an organization to help do what SKOR does?
So SKOR is a tool that measures workplace culture because we measure culture through leaders and teams with a score. You get a score
Hmm.
out of 100. And SKOR is the universal metric for workplace culture. That's what SKOR is, because today there is no universal metric for workplace culture. There's no metric on the scorecard when it comes to people and culture. And we want to be that. And our whole vision, and that's why we call it SKOR, is that it's part of the vernacular. So in months to come, Dusty, when you have leaders on here, you'll be saying, hey, what's your score? And if they
Hmm.
say, oh, we're 81, like, wow, like he really or she really focuses on their people and culture. There's a transparent, you understand. It's kind of like the NPS for workplace culture. Because when someone says their NPS with their customers, you know basically where they sit. But today, when you ask someone about their culture, you just get lots of words. I would call it word bombs. Lots of marketing words about, ephemeral, statements around foosball tables and fun Fridays and potentially free, unlimited PT. But no number. But if you say, we're 85 or we're 75, or frankly, we're 43 because we're struggling, but I'm really focused on improving it. So we'll hopefully get to 55 this year. I love that, right? Like that's leading into objectivity and matter of fact. And as you know, the only way you can improve is to acknowledge where you're at today, right? So it's a numbers-based platform. That's really what SKOR is. So we're an assessment platform that measures workplace culture and then connects it to profit potential, because we want leaders to rethink their approach about their cultures to be their number one priority. And the only way I will convince leaders to focus on culture and people as a number one priority is to show them how much profit they're missing out on by not having people and culture as their number one priority. So that's really what SKOR's about at a high level.
That's a vehicle to get to, hey, we want to make people the number one focus, but the only way we can do that is to connect the dots between the value that's being created inside of an organization when you do that. And it leads to greater profits, greater
Mm-hmm.
returns, like all of these things. This isn't an altruistic, just a score. It actually is converting that into a meaningful number, so people go, this is a return on investment. This doing it the right way actually creates value. What was the genesis of that, of being able to
Sure.
go, we want to make people and culture a priority, but we need to solve for this profit metric or this profit problem? What
Mm-hmm.
was the genesis for saying that's what we were going to solve for?
After exiting my last company and the classic, now what do I do? Really, the whole aspect of culture and people and leadership and teams, I've always loved. I've always loved teams, always loved culture, always loved servant leadership. And I've always said my job as a leader is to create the environment in which people thrive. That's my job.
Mm.
If we fail as a team, it's on me. If we're struggling as a team, it's on me. That's my job as a leader. And I thought, well, how do other CEOs think about this area? And I interviewed lots of CEOs in this area, and very few CEOs think about their people as teams, and very few focus on their cultures. They think culture is one of those, oh, maybe things we'll get to when we have time. It's everything else, sadly, before them. And I'm thinking, well, they're missing out on a significant amount of upside by not
Hmm.
focusing on their people and culture. And I thought, well, how are we going to convince them to really rethink? How can we invite CEOs to rethink their approach about culture and people? And then I reflected about me as a CEO. When was I ever convinced to change my mind as a CEO? I really reflected upon that question, and I really came up with two ways. I guess I had ever had my mind changed. One was if I knew that I was losing in a competitor set, meaning my competitors are beating me at something, that might invite me to rethink. And I thought, well, if we could measure something and then benchmark you and show that you're losing to your competitors, you might change your mind. So one was competitors. And the second piece that I was convinced that I could grow more profit and be more profitable as a company, I would also have to be convinced to change my mind. Because if I want to grow more profit, then why wouldn't I change my mind on something? And I thought, well, if I could create a system that could convince CEOs to focus on their cultures and their people, I've got to show them how they can grow their profits, and I can show them how they're going to beat their competitors. And that was the genesis of SKOR. Like, there's no point building a system where I can't show them the ROI to profit. And there's no point building a system if I can't show them how they can, beat their competitors, or frankly, why they're losing to them. And that was the whole genesis of SKOR, is a completely from the ground up way in which we measure culture, but leaning into data around competitors and profit growth. So then CEOs can finally realize, how much money they're missing out on. Or the other way, we blogged about this last year, how many Benjamins they're burning up by not focusing on their culture and people.
I agree with you, like wholeheartedly, philosophically. I have seen it work. But the actual conversion metric where you can go, hey, if I do this, I get this plus 10% or 20% or 30%, it pays off. As you've run SKOR and as you've learned and been curious, maybe we'll go down the other path too, but what are a few things that are consistent or universal that the great companies do that create a better score and lead to higher profits?
It's interesting you asked this question, because every quarter we publish a state of culture report. So we're comparing industry versus industry. And actually, coincidentally, tomorrow we're publishing a Q1 report, so of this calendar year, of comparing industries when it comes to workplace cultures. So we'll be posting that next few days. So what's interesting is that organizations that crush it lean into all these areas of culture, the 3 C's we call cohesion, clarity, and courage. And it's really about those aspects that really drive success. So what I mean by that is cohesion is how people turn up together, common beliefs, core values. How is that woven into the fabric of the organization? That's a critical piece of cohesion. Teams, organizations, etc. The next thing is clarity. Now, that is such an opportunity for teams, because clarity is about, does everyone understand what's expected of them, and they understand how their goals ladder up to team and company goals. It's so interesting. The great companies do it well, so few do it well. It's so interesting. It's one of those high impact, low effort areas. But I mean, if you saw the Gallup report a few minutes ago, I think something like half the people in our workplace, Dusty, don't know what's expected of them. They don't even know their accountabilities. This is like 101 stuff when it comes to just roles. So imagine if organizations just spent the time with their managers and teams to go, your job this quarter is to make sure everyone understands their accountabilities, their goals, and what's expected of them the next 3 months. They will have such an increase in performance. It's just mind blowing. But so if you do it well, so clarity is a big one. And the third, I won't say my favorite, but the one I think that has the biggest upside is courage. And obviously all this leans into the reason why you're doing what you're doing, but transparency, growth mindset, managers that are curious. We talk about healthy conflict, managers and leaders that are all about invite, feedback and opportunities across the teams. So the ones that are doing well crush it in these 3 areas. And then it's obviously, as you would appreciate, everything in between. What's great about these things is that it's not rocket science. These are muscles that, if done well with focus, can really reshape teams and companies.
It isn't rocket science, but I agree with you. I mean, I've seen this time and time again working with clients and in leading teams for 25 years. It's almost like footwork in a athletic environment of football or whatever it is.
Yes.
It's the fundamentals, and if you don't do that well, you cannot win championships. But
100%.
how few people want to go work on the basic stuff because
Yes.
it's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not value added, or it doesn't feel value added. And one of my mentors once shared with me, and I've never forgotten this, is 25 years ago, is Dusty, when you are tired of talking about it, it is only starting to sink in. You have to
Yes.
say it until you're tired
Yes.
of it. And so when people see you coming down the hall or you're doing a skip level, they know you're always going to talk about three things. You're going to talk about the vision, you're going to talk about the values, and you're going to talk about the mission, what it is we do for the customer, connecting dots. And so I love like cohesion, clarity, and courage. It's like you say, it's not rocket science, but it's execution science. It's the
Yes.
ability to be disciplined and
Yes.
execute the fundamentals that make the greatest organizations and make the greatest leaders. At least that's my
100%.
interpretation of what you just said.
Absolutely. And just on that point, it's all down to leaders and managers, because you could have a CEO that doesn't get it, but a whole bunch of the managers get it, and those teams will thrive regardless. But inversely, you have a CEO who's saying all those things, doing all the right things, but then two levels down, those managers don't get it. They're dictating, they're finishing with statements, they're not encouraging all those things they need to, and that team is suffering. Like there's unquestionable, sadness when it comes to those, because people, I mean, millions of people were promoted to positions to manage, but never given the tools to lead. And we need to give our managers the tools to lead. And that's why like so much of our assessment is focused on leaders and managers, because managers and leaders are the culture carriers. Must start with them. And if we're then able to elevate them with this intentionality of these are the actions we develop, these are the skills we develop our leaders with, then all those teams will eventually end up thriving. But it's got to be with the managers and leaders, and it's got to be based on peer-based learning. Otherwise, we're going to be continuing to fail, and the Gallup reports will be even worse.
I'm obviously a fan, but it's because I couldn't agree with you more, and I've seen it work, and because there's such a difference. Like between, I like to think about it through the lens. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Is that when you do this well, when you clear, and I use a very similar approach, maybe different semantic words, but when you create a
Cool.
clarity and you create alignment and you create the ability to execute through effective leadership, you unlock discretionary effort. You give you allow people to connect the dots and like they're not just doing the job. They're really leaned in and they know why they're doing it. They know where they're
Totally.
going. They know what's in it for them. All those basic questions. As you've been building this organization and as you've been learning about this, what assumptions did you have that proved to be untrue or not as relevant? Like a hypothesis maybe that you had when you launched
Yeah.
SKOR that has now been disproved. I don't want to say it was wrong. It's like a hypothesis is, hey, this is what we believe based on the experiment today. And then we do an experiment and we learn something different. But what did you believe a year ago or 2 years ago that you've now changed your opinion on, or your thinking has evolved based on what you've learned?
Always rethinking, Dusty. It's such a great question. I would say, so if I thought about this, I may have a slightly different answer, but I always go with the answer that came up first as you were asking the question, like what turns up to me first. And probably the area that has changed the most is our questions in the assessment. Because I felt at the start, like a year or so ago, that the questions, obviously with importance, would be relatable by all. And as I reflect now, going, God, what an idiot I was. Of course not. Because different cultures, different locations, different environments, different education levels, right? So the questions, like even, 3 months ago, the questions we had were of a certain level of education and probably sophistication that in hindsight were the wrongly designed questions. So now we have all of our questions on our high school graduated level only, because and even like that, even I remember 3 months ago, and I can like embarrass me and say it, like one of the questions had like, are you familiar with your KPIs? Like some people didn't even know what KPI stood for, but here we are, like just assuming that, well, not even assuming, just basically it was almost a subconscious assumption that if I know, then others do. And that's what's like, it's leaning into that whole, well, I can't assume anything. I need to like start with complete, ground up and almost appeal to the lowest common denominator of anyone in any situation. So now it's basically the questions have been redesigned completely to be all about, everyone can read them and digest them and understand them quickly. Not this, I wonder what that means. Because if the question invites that pause, it's the wrong question. We need to have a very specific question to get a very specific answer. Otherwise, we've struggled. So that's probably the biggest thing. We're finding a lot of other things behind the scenes. That's probably the biggest thing that has evolved the most is the questions and the relatability for the person completing it to be very intentional with how they answer. And that was probably completely different, 6 months ago, at least of all, a year ago.
I'm fascinated because when I look at cohesion, clarity, and courage, like you're learning and refining and distilling and getting greater and greater clarity. And I'm struck with a lot of organizations, specifically engineering-minded organizations, data-minded organizations, are focused on being the smartest people in the room. And, they don't have the courage to change. Like I've seen that. I know you've seen that too. But what I'm hearing is like the humility of understanding, hey, in many ways, it's like what you just said about the success in creating a good culture is not rocket science. Well, it's not rocket science in the creation of the question where it's a complicated thing that needs to be understood. It is creating clarity of what it is you're really trying to ask and understand so that you can convert that into meaning. Because if you don't get good inputs, the outputs are garbage, as we all know.
Totally. And another thing that we've evolved significantly on is the whole science of teams. So like in our assessment today, there's different questions that are posed to the manager of the team, to the individual contributor of the team. So we're identifying and assessing how that leader's turning up and leading their team. And then we're assessing the entire team of how they're receiving that leadership. So you get a full 360 of team. Now, 6-9 months ago, that wasn't the case. We didn't have that level of assessment between those teams. So again, that came from learning and feedback from clients about, well, here we are thinking we have a lot of answers from managers, but actually what we need to do is verify that from the teams. So now the product is all about this 360 of teams, and you get a full lens to then take action around. Then 6 to 9 months ago, again, my hypothesis of what I thought was the case was incorrect. So we changed that, obviously, and now the product is a much more, 360 view of it. So again, constant learning, constant feedback from customers, as you know, like we talked about this a little while ago, is so critical.
Let me ask you something. Are you leading off of instinct? I mean, you've got the vision, you've built the thing, but most leaders I talk to are still flying without a system. Vision to Victory, the mastermind, changes that. It's a 12-week experience where we install the leadership operating system you've always needed: purpose, strategy, cadence, metrics, execution. This isn't a course. It's not more content. It's a small group of leaders who are done chasing clarity and ready to lead with it. You'll walk out with a full leadership operating system, a trusted circle of peers, and a repeatable way to scale without losing yourself along the way. There are only 12 seats in this group, and most are already spoken for. It's an application-only process. Go to arcusgroup.com/mastermind to apply. I want to switch to you a little bit. And as you look back and reflect on your career and the successes you've had, the challenges you've navigated, what was one of your defining moments as a leader where you can look back now and go, this was the start of, or this was the actual inflection point for growth? But, sometimes you don't know it when you're in that crucible environment. You don't know it when it's going on. But what's a crucible moment or an inflection point in your leadership journey? What was going on and what'd you learn from that? Maybe what'd you take from that that has helped you going forward?
It's probably one of the biggest in my career was in my company Unique World. So my first real company as opposed to Eddie's Internet Solutions. We were a technology consulting company. And, 2008, if you asked me, you tell us a bit about your culture, I would give you that word long. Oh, we're collaborative, you're supportive, you think our core values were people, integrity, and excellence, like the classic ones. And I thought we had a pretty good culture. And our business was about a $10 million business, probably doing about 15% net profit. And thought it was pretty good. Professional services, 15%, pretty good. But then financial crisis hit, in, as we all know, September 2008. And we were crushed. We went from, had at the time maybe 70, 80 billable people in the space of a week. Our four biggest customers terminating in a week.
Oh,
And
wow.
we went from 70 billable people to 25. It was disastrous. We were hemorrhaging cash hand over fist. We didn't know what to do. And what was interesting through that lens of that October, November, December period, that ended 2008, was people started to blame each other, Dusty. Sales are blaming delivery. Their delivery's fault. I should have done a better job of the customer would never have terminated. And delivery is like, no, it's sales fault, because customers are always going to terminate if they're financially struggling. Where's the next customer? Where's the pipeline? So here we are thinking we had a great culture to actually we had a blame culture. People were blaming each other, because in a true, incredible culture that's courageous, you galvanize through the tough times. You don't blame through the tough times. There was a lot of reflection. It was one of the toughest points of my career. In my life, I had to let 40 plus people go. Otherwise, we would die in the business. And January of 2009 sort of reset the business. We're like 35 people. We completely reset using the great game of business, this open book methodology of people at the center, transparency, open book management with the financials, and then rebuilt the business focus on culture and people. And fast forward quickly to 2011, we got to a $12 million business, 22% net profit, with giveaway 7% in bonuses. So we had a much better business after the toughest time, thinking we'd have almost no business through that time. So to your point about the crucible moments, I learned that if you're focused on people and culture, really, truthfully, no matter what tough times there are, you'll get through it. There's one thing that really bothers me. I speak to clients all the time. They're like, oh, we can't tell our people we're doing badly because they might leave. What are you talking about? You hire smart people. If they know you're doing badly, they can leave anyway. But you enable them to really connect by sharing the tough things. And the right people stay, the wrong people leave. Like, you will self-select them in and out. So that was probably the biggest learning for me in terms of that vulnerable piece of courageousness, that the right people stay and we build incredible things. And frankly, the wrong people will leave. And that's a good thing too, because you want to build something that's truly sustainable, that's all about the people. And if you focus on other things, you'll never do that. That was probably one of the biggest learnings of my career, was that through that lens of that journey.
I'm super appreciative of you sharing that story, because it really speaks to what you're doing with SKOR. Is you're not just sitting there going, hey, this is this fun thing with people and culture. It's like, no, you've actually walked the journey, seeing the results. And that's a phenomenal book. And I'll put a link to the show notes or in the show notes for everyone, because I do think in fact, I just recommended that book to a client last week, because it is so powerful. Yeah. And they talk in there about the transparency, the importance of transparency, including numbers. And when you talk about, don't tell people when things are bad, I'm reminded of Richard Branson's famous quote of when asked, about how much they were spending on training and development. He said, what if you train all these people and they leave? And he goes, what if I don't train them and they stay? I mean, people, totally. The wrong people self-select out, and the right people stay. That's what you're going for.
Totally. It's all about the people and teams. And that's the thing. It's like, this whole, like, I guess, walking on eggshells around it. Hold on a sec. You want to build a high performing team. Like, take the analogy with sports, and every team member in sports, they know what the goal is. The transparent metrics, they know what their role, they know what they have to master, they know what we want to create the same, environment in a workplace. But can you imagine imagine the workplace was a sporting game and there was no scoreboard and people didn't even know how much left on the game. Can you imagine turning up to a sporting game and not seeing a scoreboard and not seeing how much left in the game? That's 99% of our workplaces. Like, it's kind of nuts when you think about it. Going, how do you expect people to know what they need to do when they don't even know what the score is? Least of all, how much left is in the game. And that's the thing that blows my mind.
Blows my mind as well. I mean, we may be in an echo chamber here because we think the same things. But totally, I read a stat in an article a few weeks ago, and this is a little bit old. Maybe it's about 6 or 7 year old Harvard Business School article, where they were talking about they did an assessment that 95% of the people in an organization don't know or understand what the company's strategy is.
Yeah.
And that's like this telling is like you talked about 50% don't understand. And I was struck by that because I was struck by the inverse number, which is that means 5% of the people actually understand the strategy, and the company's betting all of their ability to execute strategy on 5% of the people. And that seems to be suboptimal. Like that's just not going to create success.
I think you're right. That seems to be accurate. It's nuts. Absolutely. Well, yeah, we're gonna work that out for us, Dusty, to change the world this way. That's for sure.
One day at a time, one company at a time. You mentioned
Yeah.
the culture report. It's coming out tomorrow. When this
Yes.
episode goes live in a few weeks, it'll be public. Is that a public report or is that
Yeah.
limited for your clients?
No, it's public. State of Culture report. It's all about basically thought leading in the space of measurement and culture. Anyone can go to our website and download the State of Culture report. It's free, and we post it every quarter based on the companies we work with, the organization we work with around culture. We want to elevate the importance here of measuring. So anyone can download it.
Perfect. We'll put a link to that as well and encourage folks to go do that. And, frankly, I want to also make sure we share that with our clients because I do think it's so important for people to read and understand those things. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go to some rapid fire questions. I said a few of these in advance, but I always have way more fun when I don't actually share the questions with you. And then I'm gonna circle back on something else you said a little earlier on, and maybe you've already answered this question, and if you have, then I'm going to ask you to pick a different one. But what's a book that you believe every leader should read?
You probably have a bunch of standard ones. I'm going to throw out a non-standard one just to make it fun, or maybe it is standard. I don't know. But the one that I still love to this day is not only effective at work, but more importantly in my life. Having too few leadership books that focus on life and they're focused on business. My favorite is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. If you're not familiar with it, it's the mastery of negotiating. We negotiate in our lives every day without realizing, with our spouses, with our kids, with our family members, and clearly with work. I've saved and generated millions of dollars by using these tactics of Never Split the Difference. That's probably one of my all-time favorite books. I've read probably 3 or 4 times.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I haven't read that in quite a few years. I'm going to add that back to my reread list.
Yes.
And it is a phenomenal one. And it's, my mind's racing about ways I'm sitting here kicking myself going, I violated a principle, just last week. I need to reread that. What's the absolute best leadership advice you've ever received? And maybe it's what you started the episode with, but if it is, I'm going to ask you for a different one. But what's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
The best leadership advice I've received, it's connected to what I opened with, which is, being curious, but I think the number one is be humble, the learning at every opportunity. And, the one thing I always did was failing fast. You got to fail fast, but the humble aspect is probably a critical one, because if you want to lean into learning, you can't be arrogant. You can't be all about this self-confidence, right? You need a bit of it, of course, but the humble forces you to be curious, forces you to think, forces you to have an open mind. The humble aspect of leaders is a critical one.
What's your leadership superpower, Eddie?
And this is but as you know, the superpower is also the weakness. My biggest superpower is I have extreme optimism, Dusty, extreme. Like some people will say, glass half full, I'm a drop. You have a drop and I'm optimistic. Like I'm a naturally positive person. I will find positive in everything. And I'll always if something's thrown at me, I'll just get on with it. And, probably the sidebar, I was the overweight kid, heavily teased. And I think that built a lot of armory, a lot of ability to deflect a lot of things thrown at me. So I'm just naturally optimistic as a human. Now, the strength, the superpower is the extreme optimism. The weakness, and I've learned to deal with it now, but for weakness for many years in my career was I was terrible at risk management and contingency planning. When someone threw me a curveball scenario, I'm like, no, that'll never happen. It'll be fine. Oh, yeah, we'll be fine. We'll get over it. Oh, yeah, for sure. I would deal with it through this muscle of confidence as opposed to, let me reflect. Let's run the tape. What would that look like? How would we deal with it? What's our contingency plans? How would we mitigate that? But for many years, I suffered through the superpower. Now, clearly it also was a strength, the superpower, but it was my kryptonite in the bad times. So I needed to have people around me to offset that kryptonite. But I think through the last probably 5 to 10 years in leadership, I've tried to build that muscle of contingency planning, red flag planning. What happens if it doesn't work well? What's the worst case scenario? And I never had that before, but I've had to work hard on it. And I still have to work on hard on it because my default muscle is, we'll be all right. We'll all be good. Let's high five and get over it. But as you know, it's a balancing.
It is. One of my mentors, and he was not just passing on wisdom, he was, getting in my own ear about this. He goes, once told me, Dusty, your greatest strength will become your greatest weakness. Your greatest strength is your biggest challenge. You've got to learn to look past that. And I'm often reminded of that as I think about things I like to do or things I'm good at versus the opposite side of that. How do you personally define success today, Eddie?
Well, I think I'm successful. I'm so grateful to have an incredible wife with incredible children and incredible family life. I'm already winning. Like, my success is actually, I'm getting to do the things I love. Like, it's just, I pinch myself every morning because I'm grateful for the life that I have. And I want that life to be given to others. And I'm doing that with this lens of culture and leadership. But I feel like I'm already winning, and I'm grateful for that. I feel fortunate to have that environment around me, and that's why I need to stay humble through the lens as opposed to like this arrogance through it. Because at a moment's notice, it could change tomorrow, and we all go through our challenges with our families and our kids and our partners. So I definitely have that, but relatively speaking, I'm blessed and very fortunate at that.
I love the way you've defined success there. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, how did you and your wife figure out in 90 minutes that you were not meant to work together?
When I first started Unique World, 1999, we had an office, had a whole bunch of work, had 3 or 4 staff, maybe half a dozen staff, and we had a receptionist that would answer the phones. In those days, of course, we had phones in the office. And then probably about May or June of that year, we had maybe 10, 12 people, and the receptionist called up saying that she couldn't come. She was sick. So I called my wife, who wasn't working that day. I said, hey, do you mind coming up to the office? She lived, we lived 5 minutes away from the office. Would you mind coming up and sort of, be the receptionist for the day? No problem. She's off anyway. So she turned up at, 9:30. And by 10:30, she called me an asshole and left the building. And she goes, if you talk to me like that again, we won't even be married together, at least we'll work together. And apparently the way I said something wasn't really the way I should have said something. I don't remember how I said or what I said, but it was maybe came across as maybe too abrasive to my wife, but maybe not to what a team member would have been at the time. Again, I was 24 years old. Like, this is like a long time. But it was a powerful lesson that I learned that we could never work together again. And we've still been together now, 30 years actually together now, my wife and I. Married for 23, we'll be 24 this year. So it's work, but we could never work together. And that was how we learned the hard way.
Well, it sounds like she's a pretty wise woman. She called it
sure.
early.
I'm blessed. That's for sure.
Congratulations.
For the prompt.
Well, you can play her. You can make sure that she hears that. Though I'm sure, knowing you, she hears it regularly of how blessed you are. Eddie, what's a cause or an organization that you are passionate about supporting?
I'm a board member of a nonprofit called Second Chance Toys. I've been on the board now about a year and a half. I'm deeply passionate about basically. So what we do as an organization is we basically collect toys that families no longer want because their kids are grown out of it or basically are in a state of disrepair. We pick them up, we clean them, sanitize them, and we give them to underprivileged communities and families that have no toys. Yeah, not only do we take it out of landfill because toys are destined for the landfill, least of all plastics. The plastic's the worst thing for the landfill. We basically clean them and distribute them through it. So look, I would say we're a struggling nonprofit. We're always trying to look for partners to help us with our cause. We donate about 500,000 toys a year that went from landfill to people's homes and into other underprivileged communities and schools. But that's one that I'm deeply passionate about in terms of the environment and the purpose with kids.
That's amazing. Well, I will make sure that we put a link for that in the show notes as well. And if someone feels compelled and would like to learn more, that'd be a great way to do that. Speaking of learning more, where can our audience learn more about you, more about SKOR, and connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Oh, for sure. Well, I'm easily contactable. You can either hit me up on LinkedIn with my name. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can find us on our website, SKOR.com. Fill in the contact us form. That's probably the two ways. Or email me from Eddie, my name, at culturescore.com. So pretty easy to be available. And I love these conversations, Dusty. So really appreciate the opportunity. I love your questions that have me on the show. And I can talk about this all day as well, like you. So I love this stuff.
Oh, Eddie, thank you so much. I've learned so much today. I've got a couple of tools that I'm adding to my tool belt. I've got a book I'm going to go reread, and frankly, I'm just invigorated and excited that there's somebody like you out there who believes that people and culture matter and is seeking to prove it through the scoreboard and the ability for companies to show that the investment they're making does make a difference. So thank you for leading that charge, and thank you for sharing some of your wisdom with our audience today. It's just been a pleasure and a delight, and I really, really appreciate it.
The pleasure's all mine. I've loved the conversation. I loved what you're doing here, Dusty. And yeah, I mean, I'll continue to share the opportunity out there for teams and companies, and excited to have you along the ride together. So thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Well, you have a great day. Folks, that was Eddie Geller, founder and CEO of SKOR, and someone who's on a mission to make sure that people and culture are not just this ethereal thing that we talk about, but are truly measured investments. And he's going to prove it. I have no doubt about that. If today's episode gave you something to think about, something to apply, then there's more where that came from. Head over to arcusgroup.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's where we share tools, insights, and our leadership frameworks to help you lead with more clarity, more alignment, and more impact. No fluff, just what helps you lead better. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time on Leadership Unlocked.